Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is finally here, with stunning animation, a completely reprised cast from the 2010 movie, and an incredible faithfulness to the source material. These are all the characters in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, Good to Evil. Spoilers ahead. Let's dig into this roster of characters, starting with the good. This time around, we're giving the gold medal of good to Knives Chow. Really, Wallace put it best. In a world chock full of realistic, majorly flawed characters, Knives is a pure angel.
And Knives is an angel.
She's the youngest character in the ensemble cast, which is reflected in her open-minded, forgiving nature. While she obviously isn't happy with Scott cheating on her with Ramona, nor with Ramona for taking her man, she gives a lot of leeway to both of them. She's ultimately willing to help Ramona find Scott and forgives him pretty quickly once he says sorry. Knives also gets to find herself this time around, rather than have most of her arc center around Scott. She befriends the other members of the band and discovers some hidden musical talent, and as mentioned before, she risks her neck to save Scott in the final battle. She's both too cool for Scott and too pure for this world. Taking the runner-up position is her unexpected buddy, Steven Stills. As the leader of Sex Bomb, he's the most passionate about pushing the band to succeed. This makes him the most prone to anxiety about whether or not they suck too, but this doesn't take away from Steven's good qualities. He treats everyone around him with care and respect, being one of the most reverent friends of Scott at his funeral.
Miss you, pal.
He also becomes fast friends with Knives, even if it was partially to replace Scott in the band. When he and Knives get Matthew Patel on board with their musical, he goes to young Neil for creative advice, believing that he wrote the original movie script, showing that he respects his fellow artists and is a compassionate guy all around. Speaking of fellow artists, the brilliant young Neil is up next. This absolute legend might only be in third place on the hierarchy of good, but don't let that fool you. He may be absent-minded and a little bit slow, hence us rewarding him the Darwin Medal. But to put it simply, young Neil is a straight-up vibe. He treats everyone around him as a buddy and takes on every opportunity that comes his way. Even a movie script about his deceased friend winning in an alternate universe. He's not the brightest or the most overtly heroic, but Neil is a reliably sweet and friendly guy you can always count on, even though he's not sure what he's doing, and he probably caused a lot of property damage in that golf cart. The last non-member of Sex Bomb is up next, Kim Pine, the rage-channeling drummer girl. Kim is not nearly as nice as the previous few characters on the surface. She's snarky and sarcastic, especially towards Scott and anyone else she doesn't particularly like. But unlike some of the more unsavory characters on our list, her sarcasm doesn't come from a place of malice. She just has a lot of anger to work through, which she does just fine by channeling it into her drumming. She can be just as compassionate as Scott's other friends and makes an effort to be friendly with Knives and help her discover her musical talent. Kim has a rough exterior, but she's a genuinely good person and goes to show that you can't judge a book by its cover. Next up, a quick mention of Scott's sister Stacy Pilgrim is in order. I say a quick mention because, well, she's actually barely in the show. She seems friendly enough, and the only mark against her is her tendency to gossip about others, mostly celebrities and CEOs. Not saying gossip is good, but compared to what most of this show's cast gets up to, it's practically nothing. Rounding out the good characters is Scott's cool gay roommate, Wallace Wells. Can I just say, first of all, the movie did this guy dirty. His habit of stealing Stacy's boyfriends is nowhere to be seen here, nor is his tendency to be gossiping about his friends constantly, which brings a lot more attention to his good qualities.
Why be Wallace Wells for free?
Thinking about it objectively, Wallace is a guy who's willing to share his already small living space, even including his bed, with Scott. And, like in the movie, he pressures him to break up with Knives so as not to break that poor angel's heart any further. He's supportive of Scott, too. While he often gives him a hard time, he always shows up to his band performances as a supportive buddy. That said, while he has some admirable qualities, Wallace isn't perfect. He can be a bit egotistical at times, like when he tried to advertise his admittedly impressive talent at the Scott's Precious Little Life musical. That's enough to give him the Pride Medal. And also, given that he's the most openly gay character, we can't resist that pun. He's also a bit of a heartbreaker, honestly, but still better with romance than a lot of the ensemble cast. With that, we move on from Wallace, taking us from the gay area into the gray area. Kicking off this category is the first of Ramona's evil exes, Roxanne Ritchie. Out of all Ramona's exes, her hurt was arguably the most understandable. Anyone who's been ghosted before can understand how she felt when Ramona left her without saying even a word. This leads to her willingly joining the League of Evil Exes and fighting Ramona, but to her credit, she forgives Ramona when she finally apologizes and the two become friends. Sadly, no kissing, but she did impulsively make out with Kim, which gives her a well-deserved lust medal. In the epilogue, she's helping Todd re-veganize himself, which shows that her goodwill isn't limited to people she wants to make out with, which is why we placed her here. Next up is another evil ex, Todd Ingram. First off, for his relapse arc, we're giving him the Gluttony Sinner medal. I like butter on popcorn too, man, but there is such thing as too much of a good thing. That egregious sin aside, though, Todd is by far one of Ramona's least harmful exes. From what we see, he's a caring best friend with benefits to Envy and on-set fling boyfriend to Wallace, so he's definitely got the capacity for a healthy relationship. His misdeeds don't really get any worse than joining the League of Evil Exes, so we won't place him any lower. The only thing scarier than one evil ex is two, plus a robot. Enter Kyle and Ken Katayanagi, plus an honorable mention for their little robot guy, Robot 01. Technically, they're responsible for the kidnapping of Scott Pilgrim in the distant future. In that timeline, they learn their lesson and become friends, even forming a band with music it's technically music. Because of their friendship, they're willing to help him travel back in time and stop himself from ever dating Ramona, hence the kidnapping. That's not to mention the robot's willingness to show Scott his footage so he could know the truth after being whisked away into the future. While they have the capacity for good, we can't ignore their affiliation with the League, nor the fact that they stalked practically the entire cast via Robot's camera. But now it's time to talk about the reason for the League of Evil Exes existing in the first place. Ramona Flowers. Nobody likes being ghosted, or cheated on, or otherwise heartbroken. Now, we'll give Ramona credit for her ultimate willingness to face her past and stop abandoning the people she loves. That said, we are not giving her any credit for breaking the hearts of 7 guys in all the aforementioned ways, and then some to the extent that they formed a massive organization specifically to get back at her.
The most horrifying thing I've ever seen.
Everyone makes mistakes, of course, and to Ramona's credit, she does make amends where she can, and she gets a lot of points for the effort she makes to find Scott. But that credit is only just enough to keep her right above her love. Narrowly, and we do mean narrowly, avoiding the full-on bad guy territory is Scott Pilgrim himself. Really, to justify why Scott is this low on our list, all we'd need to say is that he fake dated a high schooler, being 23 to her 17, just to get over his ex. He then proceeds to not break up with her because it would take effort. Sloth metal, by the way. And you really begin to wonder why this dude isn't even lower. The reason is simple. Like Ramona, Scott is a jerk and mostly remains blissfully unaware of how much he hurts the people around him. But also like Ramona, once it's brought to his attention, he makes an effort to better himself. He finally apologizes to Knives and things end amicably, and his confrontation with his future self motivates him to never sink so low, but that's a discussion for later. For now, Scott is at least trying to be a better friend, partner, and person, and that's just enough to keep him from the bad to evil. She's not one of Ramona's, but Envy Adams is an evil ex nonetheless. While Envy isn't really out to hurt anyone per se, her character can be summed up as a narcissistic jerk of a celebrity. Envy is willing to take an event as sacred as Scott's funeral.
I'd like to thank you all for coming out to see me.
And hijack it in order to insult and demean him, and of course get her own performance in the spotlight. But she does attend the musical performance, so she might care a little more than she lets on. Emphasis on little. Lucas Lee sticks the landing here, to which we're sure he'd respond with a resounding whatever.
Whatever.
Amazing skateboarding skills aside, Lucas Lee, or Luke, as he's known later on, is a pretty rough figure. He doesn't care what others think about him, leading him to treat most people with very little respect and consideration. Once he loses his career, he shoves a child off his skateboard and takes it for himself. And by his own admission, he doesn't believe the League of Evil Exes is actually evil, indicating that he didn't see anything super wrong with this action. As far as good qualities go, he does have a pretty heartwarming bromance with Gordon later on. The power of friendship can't save anything, but it can definitely save Luke from falling any lower. Next up is the very first evil ex, the legendary Matthew Patel. This theater kid, comic relief villain combination is as ruthless as he is hilarious. Sure, he seems to respect the other exes, aside from Gideon, and he's considerate enough to give Scott an RSVP to his own personalized butt-kicking, even hand-delivering the letter in a blizzard. But he's also more than willing to steal Gideon's entire empire for himself to become rich and famous beyond measure. While he's still not full-on evil, Matthew Patel is ruthless and will do pretty much anything to get what he wants. Let's not forget how giddy he was when he thought he'd legitimately killed Scott.
I punched Scott Pilgrim to death!
Speaking of people who were glad to hear Scott died, the Bronze Medal of Evil goes to Julie Powers. We'll start this out by saying we get that it seems like a harsh placement, but hear us out. Julie is extremely snarky and mean. She hates Scott to the point that she's glad to hear he's been killed, and she's also really rude to customers. But surely this doesn't justify a bottom 3 spot. She even takes in Gideon Graves when he loses everything, recognizing him as her high school's weird kid, Gordon Goose showing that she is capable of decency. But later, she reveals that the reason she accepted him was because she found it hot that he wanted revenge on Matthew Patel and the others. That lust for seeing someone else get hurt earns her the Wrath Sinner medal, as does her short temper in general. As if this weren't bad enough, she has no problem with Gordon's plan to blow up the theater during Matthew's show.
That's hot.
Probably killing most of the cast and crew. And now that we've said that, hopefully it's no surprise to see Gideon Graves, aka Gordon Goose, even closer to the bottom. While we can sympathize with his loss of, well, everything, he takes it not as an opportunity for a fresh start, but as one for revenge on those who wronged him. He's capable of friendship with Luke, and even a romantic relationship with Jules, but when he's the one who's most willing to manipulate and kill others to get what he wants, that isn't worth too much credit. But what if we told you that even with all that considered, he still isn't the most evil character? That honor goes to the semi-twist final villain, future Scott Pilgrim. If you've ever gone through a tough breakup, take comfort that you didn't take the path that Scott eventually did. By refusing to take quite literally any accountability for his actions, Scott eventually alienated everyone in his life. The only solution he found was to travel back in time to put a roofie-sourced force field between Scott and Ramona to keep them from kissing. When he found that even this wouldn't be enough, he decided the best course of action was to murder all of his friends and family in front of him, just in case they'd try and steer him in literally any other direction. Granted, Scott was almost certainly insane by this point, but that does nothing to justify this attempted friendicide of his. As sleazy as Scott can be, even he knew this guy was messed up on a whole nother level.